Hey, this is Matt Ertz, the Madison County Historian. We are still working to document the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. We are really lucky today to have with us Kurt Wheeler, who is a high school history teacher in the Cazenovia School District, as well as the coach and the mayor of the village of Cazenovia. Kurt, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
And we'll kick it right off the bat. I think most people have an idea of what the mayor does and what a teacher does now. So talk a little bit about when COVID first kind of appeared on both of the radars.
Sure. Well, of course, just from a standpoint of current events, my students and I had been tracking it globally since probably back in January. I mean, it was this sort of obscure news story, what's happening in China, and it's something we talk about for a couple minutes to start a class every day. And then obviously, as it began to get much more serious there, the discussions became more intense. And then as the first cases began to pop up in the United States, and then even spread within the United States, we started to realize this is something that could actually impact us. So as we turned into the month of March, and it was continuing to spread, we were beginning to get cases in New York, down in New Rochelle, and other places. Then it actually began to affect our planning. I remember about a week before we ended up school being interrupted, Project Cafe, I also work with them. It's a local community service youth group. They were supposed to have a public event, and we had to weigh the decision, do we still have this, or is the risk of spread such that we shouldn't? So we ended up having to cancel that event. And sure enough, the next week, things continued to accelerate, and we left school on March 16th. So, that's really kind of the progression within the school. And of course, a lot of difficult decisions. We were fortunate. We really closed school before. I mean, there was not a single case in our school district when we closed, and we really headed it off. Whereas you see in other places where they waited too long and then it became very serious. So we were fortunate in a sense, and then I think that our timing was good, and the effects here locally have been fairly minimal.
Okay. And what about the village? You guys about the same timeline or?
Similar, yeah. So really that week of March 16th, as the school went out, we began getting all these executive orders, mandating that municipalities go to 50% personnel. So we never shut down. We continued to operate every day right throughout the pandemic. But what we did is we modified our procedures just for the safety of our staff. So they were in the office every day, answering phone calls, emails, and we just worked out some creative solutions like drop boxes outside the village office, where people could leave things, and we continue to serve the public right straight through. But obviously made modifications for employees with underlying health risks. And I was very, very proud of my team at the village. They continued to work every single day throughout this whole crisis, really meeting vital needs. I mean, police, fire, law enforcement, water, sewer, these are things you can't live without. So I give my employees at the village a lot of credit for their courage and just without hesitation continuing to serve the public.
And that leads into my next question. Talk a little bit about, so when everything first closed, everything closed for 2 weeks, and it was, we'll see you in 2 weeks. And when that 2 weeks was up, it was like, this is going to be longer than 2 weeks.
Right.
And you guys, all governments, school districts, everyone kind of had to adapt on the fly. So talk a little bit about that process of, okay, here's what we're going to do for 2 weeks. Now what do we do, and how you guys made that work?
Sure. The timing of our spring break, we really had a pretty good sense that, if we went for 2 weeks, that was going to put us right in the vicinity of our spring break. And so we wouldn't be coming back for at least 3 to 4 weeks. So we really had a sense that it was going to be a fairly extended period of time. And that timing was fortuitous, and that, that gave, what we thought at the time was a little more breathing room. We were also fortunate in that we had already had a planned staff development day the week before we ended up stopping in-person instruction. And so we kind of said, look, we see what's happening in other parts of the country, and leaned into it. And that staff development day was devoted to making contingency plans of how would we deliver instruction if we had to do that. So, we really began making preparations about a week before we actually had to execute that order. and things like getting the students geared up. I mean, the staff, we can always continue to make adjustments. The key is communicating those changes to the students before they left. So yeah, even our last day of school was a Monday, and even the end of that week before, we were communicating to students, take your materials home, take your textbooks home, make sure you're all signed up for the Google Classroom. And so we were fortunate in that I think our students left on March 16th pretty well prepared for what we thought was going to maybe be a 1 month interruption. And then of course we continued to hold out hope that we would get back perhaps May 1st, or every couple of weeks the deadline would kind of slide until eventually, of course. And I'll be honest, I remember the day that the governor announced that schools would not be resuming. As both a teacher and a coach, I just tried to stay really positive, and just, hey, come on guys, let's continue to work hard. And, my athletes, for example, get outside, continue to work out, continue to run, we're going to get back, we're going to have a season. And I had just been putting all my energy into being positive. And I'll be very candid with you. When that announcement came down, I was here at home by myself in my home office, and I just shut the door and wept. It was so emotionally devastating to realize that we weren't going back. And all that positive energy I had, I was kind of tapped out, and I just had nothing left. I remember that day.
And that's how a lot of us, we've all had that moment where, I don't want to say it became real, but it became too real. So talk about, how did the students deal with, I mean, we've had different districts.
Excuse me 1 second. Let me just shut my office door.
Yep.
We've got a dog here. Hey guys. Hey guys. I'm on Zoom. Can you keep Teddy quiet? Sorry, my daughter's just returned from a trip somewhere. Sorry, what was your next question?
I have two outside that are sitting with my wife for the very same reason. So, so talk about, how did your students respond, and talk about the struggles with teaching at home. I mean, teaching through a computer.
Sure. I give my students all the credit in the world. Really, for the most part, they remained very engaged and very positive through the whole thing. I'm fortunate to the students that I teach. They're generally very self-motivated, and there'd be occasions I wouldn't hear from a student for a week or so, and I'd give them a call and kind of check in, and the next week they'd be sort of back in the game. But across the board, they were great. Same thing with my track girls. They just maintained a really positive attitude. That in many ways was probably a harder transition. How do you support your athletes? I mean, sports is more than just about the actual competition. There's a huge social emotional component to sports as well. For a lot of kids, that's what gets them up in the morning. That's where they come to school, is that chance to be with their friends and participate in sports. And so we very consciously, we created a virtual team. We were ready the day that we went out. That would have been our first day of practice. And so we had already set up a website for our team, and we continued to interact on that. I posted every single day right up until we just had our end of season event about a week ago. And I posted on that every single day, photos and updates and encouragement and, workouts and challenges. I think in some ways that was harder than the online teaching, was the online coaching, is trying to find ways to keep the girls' attitudes positive and their morale up. And I think that fellowship that we had electronically was important. We do Zoom calls once a week, kind of virtual team meetings. And, it's one thing when you're doing it for instruction and, there's sort of a purpose, but those were really primarily social. And there was a very positive I think outcome to that. With regard to the instruction, again, I feel like I'm pretty fortunate. High school students, and especially upper level high school students, are pretty self-motivated, and they're pretty able to access the learning themselves. I could put out the assignments and the readings and then conduct class, and the students, for instance, can get themselves on their own Zoom calls. What was a completely different point of view, my wife and I do foster parenting for the county, and we have a 7-year-old with us right now. So for me, being a high school teacher, trying to help guide a first grader through those core things, learning to read, learning to do basic math, was far more challenging. That's probably the most challenging aspect of this whole experience, of all my different hats, mayor and coach and high school teacher and all that. Being a homeschool first grade teacher was probably the most difficult role that I had. And so hats off to all those parents out there who went through those challenges without the benefit of formal training as an educator. So it's been a tough challenge for families.
We had a sixth grade teacher who talked about her struggles with her fourth grader, her child, the fourth grader. And she said that, it's just a different, she goes, number one, it's mom. It's harder to take information from mom, but the difficulties they struggled with. So once you've kind of made this through that here now, talk a little bit about how do you think COVID will change both your classroom, maybe in the fall, but even if we came back and they came out with a vaccine tomorrow, the truth is it's never going to go back to what it was because of the nature of what it was. So talk about how you think your classroom is going to change in the future and how COVID might, impact how you do things.
Right. We'll, obviously we'll implement whatever changes we have to get back in the classroom. And that's the one thing that I just want to state emphatically is, I think nearly every teacher that I know, every student I know is just emphatic that even if it means accepting some risk, we've got to get these kids back in the classroom in the fall. The damage that is being done educationally, especially to the little ones, and socially, emotionally to all of them, there's a real health cost to that as well. And so, I think teachers and students are pretty united in the fact that we've got to get them back in the classroom. So we'll implement whatever procedures we have to. Honestly, I think even with some modifications, whether that might mean, fewer students per class, even if we have to wear masks, if, we have to modify how we do things in the room, I think we'll all just be so darn happy to be in the same place together that we'll just go with it. At the same time, honestly, I'm pretty optimistic. Humankind is very resilient, and we've faced worse challenges in the past. And you go back to the Spanish influenza or polio, Great Depression, World War II. The United States and humans in general have overcome terrible challenges in the past. And it's not like the Spanish influenza forever changed how we did things back then. I think we're going to adapt to this. And I think, 1 to 2 years from now, when we have things in place, I think life will get back to normal. I'm not one of these people who thinks this is going to forever change life in America. That's not my point of view.
That's totally valid, because the truth is we don't really know.
Right.
I always say the one thing I think we can take away of this, your 7-year-old is a good example. They will forever know how to wash their hands.
That's right.
So if nothing else, we've all had more than enough instruction on hand washing. And what I always compare it to is I am 41. I'll be 41 years old in a month. And when I was younger, I remember airports pre-September 11th. And my sister would have probably been, September 11th would have been like 16 or 17, but I don't know that she flew that much before then. When she flies now, the phrase, when you see something, say something, has a lot more meaning to her because she was raised with it. And right. I was raised with the never having to take shoes off to go on an airplane and that kind of stuff. And there is a difference. And that's kind of how I look at how COVID will change. It's just going to change a perspective. Like I said, it may just be that we all know how to wash hands, but the same question, do you think it'll impact how local government is administered? Because obviously everyone's local budget is going to be stressed to a pretty good degree, and right. We may have to look at different ways to do things.
Absolutely. So, that's obviously the most immediate concern that I have. And I'll be honest with you, again, we've been lucky locally. The impact here locally has been fairly limited. From the very beginning, my number one concern has actually been about the economic impact of this. We've had very few serious illnesses, and I think really here in our immediate community, no fatalities from it. But I worry about, which of those small businesses on Main Street is not going to reopen.
Right.
because of this? Who's going to lose their livelihood because of this? And especially in upstate New York, that already has a very fragile economy. There could be some big ripple effects from that. So those are the things that I've really worked on and kind of been worried about. In terms of local government, again, we've continued to operate straight through, just with some precautions, and that's worked out well for us. One minor example: we're in the process of negotiating our police contract right now, and we actually added something at our suggestion to the contract in the last cycle that rewarded people for not using sick days. If you had a certain number of, unused, or, kept it to a minimum level, you actually got kind of like a year-end bonus to thank you for your good attendance, basically. We're recommending to take that out of the contract, because now we look at it like, we don't want people coming to work if they're sick. So we'd rather have them take the sick day rather than, in the context of COVID-19, coming to work and potentially spreading something that's very hazardous.
Yeah.
So that's just a small example of how, this has really changed your viewpoint from a maybe a fiscal one to more of a health oriented one.
And that's a good way to look at it. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because everything that happens, I always tell people, local history is national history. National history may not always impact you locally, but everything what the government does. So what the federal government does will impact our state. What the state does will impact our county, and what the county does will impact our local level. So there's a lot that's just so far up in the air. We just don't know, and that touches everything, not just the local governments. The school districts are another one where you go, boy, what is going to happen? How are they going to make this work? Kurt, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, well, just one kind of unique thing that we did here in Cazenovia worked out really well, and I always point to the the power of individuals and just people's charitable spirit. One of the things that we did here locally, which was sort of led by the village, but we had many partners. There's a website you could refer to this if you Google Caz COVID response. And we put together a local website within the first week of the crisis, where there was so much happening, changing so quickly. This office is closed, that one's open. These are the procedures. How do you contact the local food pantry to get nutrition assistance? And we put up that website and have continued to add to it for the last 3 months. And basically what the mantra was matching local resources with local needs. So some people were willing to volunteer, and somebody who needed a meal delivered, somebody was willing to go deliver that meal. Kaz Cares is our local food pantry. Had the resources to help people, but they needed extra folks to come in and help them distribute those meals. Some people who kept their jobs considered themselves blessed, and they wanted to give back, and so they donated to the mustard seed, which is a thing through the St. James Catholic Church to help people in need. So we were kind of just a sort of a central clearinghouse to connect those resources and people who wanted to help with those who needed help, and also to provide an accurate local source of information for what was happening, what was going on. So that's kind of a unique thing that we did here in Cazenovia. And, I think a lot of people were able to connect and make a positive impact because of that. So my hat's off to all the people, St. Peter's Church and CHRIS, which is Community Resources for Independent Seniors. And as I mentioned, the Mustard Seed and Kaz Cares, the school district, all of our partners in that who really helped to make that successful. And I think we've met the needs here for this first phase, and we're really in a good place. God forbid if there's a second wave, I think we'll be in a good position to continue to help people in the future.
It's funny you say that, because as I've done these interviews, it makes you appreciate Madison County, if only because we have this community. Chittenango Assistance popped up out of this. The Hamilton Food Pantry expanded out of this. Morrisville kind of has this thing that they set up with the dairy giveaways out of this.
Yeah. So
you have all these different things that have come together across the county. Even, in the northern part, Canastoga's done some things. So we're fortunate to live where we live. Kurt, go ahead.
We are. Yeah, I was just going to say, we actually, I did a letter for Cazenovia College to send out to their admitted students. and basically just, told them, this is a scary time, but if you had to be someplace to endure this scary time, a very supportive small community like the village of Cazenovia is a great place to be. And we're really looking at it as kind of a long-term effort in terms of even marketing to people to move here, saying, if this could be a thing of the future, there's no place you'd rather be than a supportive rural community like Cazenovia, like Madison County. So, there could be actually a silver lining somehow to all this.
There you go. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. I hope to talk to you soon.
Very good. Thanks for your time, Matt. Take care.
Yep. Bye now.
Bye now.